Our first question is for Evan and Ellen. For students who have yet to begin interview prep, how do you recommend they get started?
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. I think the biggest thing that I did at the beginning of interview prep was just trying to think about who I was as an interviewee, like what do I need to do to make myself best prepared. So for me, I didn't really like writing down specific answers to questions. I kind of like thinking about broader topics in my head that I knew would get asked, like what's a good way to introduce myself, basic questions like why am I interested in orthopedics, and then more like easy things like what do I like to do. And then I had basic ideas of what I wanted to say, and that's kind of how I went into it. Whereas some people, like my friends at MUST, they needed to write down specific answers to every question they could think of. So I think figuring that out about yourself is most important, and then going from there.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I think I did something kind of similar, maybe a little bit more formal than what you're describing, Evan. But I think first familiarize yourself with your application, which sounds kind of basic, but you like so much happens in the 4 years of med school that you sometimes forget all the things that you were involved with. So, go back and read through your ERAS application and actually like kind of internalize what you've accomplished and what you want to highlight. And then I tend to get really anxious with interviews because I hate talking about myself, and my interviews were all virtual. So I kind of started by just looking up like the 100 most commonly asked interview questions in residency or something. Like I found some Google link and just kind of thought through my answers to different questions, and then practice talking through interview questions with like my mom or like my partner or my friends or something like that, just to kind of get familiar with like because you end up saying a lot, you end up saying a lot, or you end up like making these awkward pauses. So and I'm doing it now. So kind of practice answering questions in a less formal setting, so you're not as anxious for your first interview. And then similar to what Evan described, I think a lot of what interviews come down to is kind of who you want yourself to be represented as in your interview and how you want to represent your application. So coming up with maybe like 5 or 10 stories about yourself that you can kind of tailor to different interview questions. So maybe like the 5 most important parts of your application, or the 5 most important things that you did during medical school that you want to bring up in conversation at some point in time, and then use those stories that you kind of remind yourself in your head to come up with interview questions kind of surrounding those things. So for example, I was a part of SNMA, and I knew that I wanted to kind of highlight how I had been involved in advocacy and involved in the curricular redesign that I was part of. So people wanted me to, if someone asked me a general question like, oh, what are you most proud of, that might be an opportunity for me to talk about that. But that answer could also be brought up in what are your strengths, and I could talk about leadership or something like that related to that story. So kind of just outlining who you want to represent yourself as, which is obviously genuine to you.
So for our next question, which is for Dr. Allen and then Tucker, as interviewers, what are your go-to questions that you ask applicants, and what are you trying to gather from those questions? And specifically for Tucker, as a resident interviewer, is there anything that you do differently?
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Allen at Mount Sinai in New York City. I think to answer that question, first of all, there's not going to be one answer to that question. I think every person has different interview styles. Some people are going to be, I mean, they're all different. I think for me personally, I think that when we're inviting you for an interview, we already like you. So please know that we already like you and we actually want you to come. We're not necessarily trying to trip you. So one thing that I do a lot is I look through the application and ask something about your own application. You know that application better than I do anyway. So you should this point has been said, like go over your application and make sure you do know it, because it looks pretty silly when you don't know the answers to your own things that you put on your application. Or, I mean, a couple weird times, because I like kind of speak Chinese. I see they put Chinese, and if I've caught a couple people in lies. When you kind of go into asking about their own application. So for me, it's just asking about you. I'm not trying to like stump you on a question on orthopedics. We also don't really care if someone does ask you a question on something like that. I don't think we care if you get it right or not. We just want to make sure you're like answering something and not, just try not to be, or at least try not, you're probably nervous, but try not to act nervous and be calm. And just be honest. Like I think that was already said, just be honest about yourself and be genuine. Don't try to be something you're not. So that's it.
Yeah, I agree with all of what Dr. Allen said. Me personally, when being on the other side of it now and interviewing medical students, I would just like to get to know them on a personal level. So I ask very kind of open-ended questions, asking about their hobbies and stuff. And, I've noticed a lot asking that, like, oh, what do you like to do? And how many vague, generic answers you get. And, I like to see, and this is just me personally, but I like to see, answers that students that are what they're passionate about, like, or what are their true, genuine hobbies, what are they very interested in. It tells you a lot about the person. And as applicant as the whole, I'm not, too big on worrying about their orthopedic knowledge at that point in time. They got the interview. I'm trying to get to know them as a person. Are they someone that I can see myself working with over the next few years? Do they have, good characteristics? Do they, emphasize camaraderie? Are they a team player? Stuff like that is kind of things that I'm gauging at. And then what's the second part for me specifically?
Just if there's anything that you do differently as a resident interviewer versus an attending interviewer.
I think the only thing is I try to make it a more comfortable situation. You try and like crack a joke or make it feel very like lighthearted so they're not stressed out. I know how I felt, especially over the computer doing all these Zoom interviews. I was very on edge, very anxious. I talked a lot. I babbled a lot. So I wanted, I want the students on the other end to feel more comfortable. So however I do that, whether it's cracking a joke or, keeping a very lighthearted, open-ended conversation.
What was the hardest question or types of questions you had to answer during your interviews? And then how did you approach that? Any advice you have for those kind of tricky ones? First to Ellen.
Yeah, so I think at least when I was interviewing, I know what everyone kind of, or at least kind of generally, it seems like is nervous about is the questions where you're in a room and they ask you about a case. And I think that's, you expect to, or in your head as the interviewee, I think you're thinking, oh, I have to know the answers and know what the correct answer is. And I think it's less about that and more about your thought process and how you handle being asked questions in kind of a stressful situation. And can you logically think about the next step in clinical care, or, admit, hey, I don't know this answer, but I do know this. And that kind of makes sense to me, and kind of have a conversation with some people who are hopefully going to be your mentors and your teachers in the future. So for those rooms, I think just, try not to be too stressed walking into those rooms. I'm sure you're not the only person who doesn't know those answers. And if you nail it, then that's awesome. And, kudos to you. But at least in my head, and especially even working with sub-Is now, you don't necessarily expect that people know things, but you expect that maybe someone can be teachable, hopefully. I think probably the hardest question I was asked, the weirdest question I was asked was someone showed me a picture of a piece of artwork and asked me what it meant, which was just like totally threw me off. But I think they did that on purpose and some of these questions, like, people just kind of want to see if you're a human being. I think to Dr. Peabody's point was, in my head, like, do I want to be stuck on a 24-hour shift with you? Which is already kind of a weird time and maybe stressful. Maybe you don't sleep enough. So like, can we crack a joke and, hang out together and also get a lot of work done and high five at the end of the shift. So some of these questions that might seem like they're completely off the wall, I think it's just to try to get a read on you as a person. But I think the hardest question I was asked was, why should we want you at our program? And I think that everyone should have a really strong answer to that. And even if you're not asked it in every single interview, I was only asked it once. But that's kind of the attitude that you should walk into these interviews with, which is, you're humble, you've worked really hard, but also you're there because people want to get to know you and meet you because you've already impressed them. And you should know why they should want you as a resident. And if someone goes out of their way to ask you that, you should have a really good answer for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Ellen said, especially the one where they ask you, why should we have you at our program? I think it's just awkward kind of talking about yourself, and you got to do it in a humble way, but also say, you got to like pitch yourself as a good candidate, right? You don't want to say, oh, I'm just a normal guy that that likes to work hard, and I like orthopedics. Like, you got to make yourself stand out. I also was like thinking back on these questions. I realized that I must have like blacked out during all my interviews. So I asked some of my co-residents some of their hardest questions. So I'll pull up a couple right here. One of my co-interns said, "What's something you've done that would have gotten you rejected from medical school if they knew about it?" So I mean, I think they kind of want you to have like a funny answer, but you also don't want to say like, "Oh, I stole someone's car and like like my dad helped me get out of it," or something like that. You don't want to say something like that. You want to, I don't know, they just want to see like kind of your comedic side. So I think questions that come out of left field are hard to answer sometimes.
What are some red flags or common mistakes that you have seen applicants make during interviews?
I think anything that's just not being genuine. So I mean, for me, when you're already there, so it's if I go through an application and I see a mistake on the application, that's me. I'm kind of a stickler for grammar and that kind of thing. So again, it depends on who's looking at it. But so mistakes, lies, red flags, you be on time. We like you already. You can only just like mess it up, really. So by doing something simple like that, I've seen someone like in this kind of situation, but this happened like 2 years ago. Someone, there was like an introduction to the program, and we figured out that the person, instead of logging in and listening to the intro, actually had the phone of a video of himself pretending to listen. So that didn't work out. Like that's like, so just be you, show up, smile, be polite. Don't be polite to the like residency coordinator or whoever's helping. We find out if you're mean to them. So, because that might be, you should just be a good person too.
So one, if you're doing a Zoom interview, wear pants. That is a question I ask, actually, just as to crack a joke, like, "Oh, stand up," and are you wearing pants? Since the last 2 years of interviews have been Zoom, so you'd be surprised that people are not, dressed to the, full suit, top and bottom, just the top. So always be prepared.
Someone asked you to stand up?
Well, I was asked when I was a med student, and then I've also asked just to be funny, not thinking I would actually see I'm like wearing like sweatpants or pajama bottoms, but you'd be surprised. Yeah, it happened a few times.
I mean, whatever.
I think another thing, yes, another thing. I look at like the hobby section of like their application, and I kind of what I was alluding to when I was talking last about getting to know the person. But like if they have certain hobbies and it's something that I have or know something about, I'll kind of see if they know, because that's kind of a part of the application where people tend to not be 100% honest, and that's just kind of a trend. So if there's someone's putting down certain hobbies and they're not really their hobbies, then it's not a great look on the applicant.
That's to chime in. That is actually not on the application anymore.
Oh, well.
Or it's blocked. It might be, you might have filled it out. Did you fill it out? No, it's gone. I noticed it was gone this year. I love that section, and it's gone.
I don't know why they would.
I've heard of some people using a section, an activity section for the hobbies. Have you seen anyone doing that, or what are your thoughts on that, Dr. Han?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the activity. I don't know. I did notice that.
That's off the interview topic. Just thought of it right there.
Yeah. I kind of it's not. I kind of enjoyed using that for both reasons, to actually get to know people, and maybe sometimes to catch something, but I don't see it anymore. But I mean, if they put in activities and it's activity, that's fine, I think.
Let's say an interview isn't going well for whatever reason. Maybe you came a little too clean on what should have kept you out of undergrad or medical school, or you got caught wearing pajama pants or something like that. Let's say something's not going well during the interview. What are some tips you have for keeping a level head in a situation like that? Maybe not those that extreme.
Yeah, I think I kind of had this experience at one of the programs that I really was excited to interview about. I think I just got myself a little too psyched up for it. Um, and I just found myself tripping over my words a lot. Not that I like spilled the tea on anything I did, but I just, after like, because you get breaks between sessions a lot of the time, I just kind of shut my camera off, or like went for a walk outside just for like 2 minutes and just like regroup myself, and was like this isn't any different than the other interview you did yesterday or the interview you'll do tomorrow. And just kind of, I don't know, I played sports a lot growing up, so it's just like when you're in a hard time in the game and you just gotta like close your eyes and tell yourself that you prepared for this for a long time, and you're not gonna let like a couple of mishaps with how you're speaking, or an interaction with a person ruin the whole thing. Because I think you'd be surprised at how many people either trip over their words or say something they think was wrong, whereas somebody might not even catch what you said. So don't be too hard on yourself in those moments, and just kind of try to relax and just go for the next one.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think having like a way to kind of like regroup in between, especially on Zoom interviews, because they can be quick, and sometimes like a really good interview, even just getting cut off awkwardly by the interview room ending can feel like you got a premature, like, I don't know, ending to your conversation. You can be like, oh my gosh, I didn't have a chance to thank them or whatever. So just giving yourself a little bit of headspace just to kind of regroup, but also just, remember that you are there because people want to talk to you and want to get to know you. And you're also getting to know them on some level. Like your rank list is just as important as the program's rank list, as far as, kind of the general vibe that you get for programs and interviews. And also remember, that you worked really hard and you're there for a reason. And essentially, like, by the time you're done doing the interview, like that's the last thing. There's nothing else that you're going to do. You've already done all the things to get to that point. You already got the interview. I mean, this is really just kind of the cherry on top of the cake. So try to, remember that and remind yourself, you're there for a reason. These people want to talk to you for a reason. And we're all a little awkward, I think, at a baseline, probably, especially over Zoom or virtually, or just meeting new people. So it's okay to, have a mishap, or you just, say something that, seems a little bit, off in the moment. I'll say, like, if someone caught me wearing, sweatpants in an interview, maybe you laugh about it, but also, like, at the end of the day, like, I would want to match to a program where my co-residents are going to like heckle me about it a little bit, but then ultimately like be like, yeah, we would wear sweatpants to our interview too. So like, it's all okay. So like you'll find your fit, within whatever, but sometimes those little like funny moments that happen that seem awkward are also the reasons why you stand out. So try not to sweat it too much.
But for Dr. Allen, for applicants that really impressed you, what was it about their interviews that impressed you the most?
That's hard. I mean, you're all so impressive. I don't think I would have gotten in if I were applying. Now, I love stories. I think anything that makes you stand out a little bit. I mean, just kind of noting your accomplishments somehow. You like you said, it feels awkward to tell about yourself, but telling your story, telling the things you overcome. I love a good feel good, like, oh, this is what I overcame story, and we want to know someone is going to be able to do that in residency. So standing out, being someone like you had said you want to hang out with for 24 hours. And again, like, we already are impressed with your application. That's why you're there. I think just being someone that you connect with and having a good story. So it doesn't sound like every other story of someone going into orthopedics, but only if that's you. Just, yeah, be genuine.
To Ellen and then to Tucker, how do you tailor your interview preparation for specific programs, specific schools, locations? What are you doing to prep for that?
Yeah, so I tend to be anxious at the baseline. So I had like a little morning routine where I like had my outfit laid out for the day and made sure that, my camera was set up and my ring light was set up. And I would like wake up early, have a good meal, like work out or whatever to like blow off some steam. So I would hopefully be a little bit less high strung. But for specific programs, I would, the day before, in the morning of, kind of look at their website, remind myself why I applied to that program. kind of look at the surrounding area, maybe around, the city around that program or whatever hospitals are there, and kind of just get familiar, kind of get in the zone, be like, okay, if I'm going to go here as a resident, like, what do I really want to know about this place? How do I envision myself fitting in here? Like, what park would I take my dog to? Like, what would the coffee shop be like that I would hang out at, or whatever. So try and like really, like, if this is your only interview for all of residency, for each of these interviews, like, what information are you trying to like hone in on, essentially? So really try and get in the zone, I guess. Same as like if you play sports or something like that. And then I also kind of had an idea in my head of what I was looking for out of a program. So I had a list of questions that I came up with at the beginning of interview season, and then towards the end of interview season had maybe some more specific questions after learning more about different programs. But think about what you want out of a program and what kind of support you're looking for out of the mentorship that you're going to have, and maybe what you're looking for out of the surrounding area. And I had like a list of general questions that I mostly asked at every program that I interviewed to, because oftentimes these interviews end with, oh, do you have any questions for us? And I like to have a question, because then it gave me a little bit more information. It gave me an opportunity to get to know these people a little bit better and the program a little bit better. But come up with like a list of things that you want to know about all these programs. And it also gives you a way to, at the end of the day, when you're sitting down with your notes from these interviews and sitting down after completing all your interviews, it gives you a way to kind of objectively look at the information that you gained. And you go with your gut punch instinct. Like, did you really fit in with these people? Did you really like have a nice interview session, really feel like you could be colleagues with these people? But also, is that program going to offer you the things that you're looking for out of a residency? So I like to kind of think about that as well. But that was my method.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. I think for me personally, I just had like a few questions jotted down for each program prior to my interview. Ellen kind of nailed everything about this. So I think the only one thing you should not do is not have any questions prepared. So, I mean, you of course get asked, do you have any questions about the program? And, you don't want to be the student that says, no, I don't have any questions. It kind of shows a lack of interest, but I mean, there has to be some questions, whether it be, lifestyle outside of residency, they can talk to the other residents about, faculty mentorship or advocacy. Sorry, stumbling on that, but always come with the prepared set of questions, even if it's just some very bland, open-ended questions. It shows interest in the program.
Yeah, worse than having no questions is asking the same exact question to every single interviewer. If it's like something that's kind of specific, I mean, you could ask someone, what's your favorite part of the program? And I guess that's general enough where maybe people won't catch on. But like at the end of the day, everyone's going to sit in a room and talk about you, and they will notice if you ask them all like, oh, what's your commute like on your way to work or something like. But
that was actually a perfect transition. We were going to ask next, what are some good questions for students to ask residents specifically? Evan, do you have anything to add to that? I was going to ask Tucker, but he brought it there naturally.
I think obviously the basic questions like what do you guys like to do? What are some like I like beer, so what are some good breweries, or what are some good things that pertain to your hobbies? Because then they can ask you about your hobbies. But one that I stole from like sometimes you do little group interviews the night before. An applicant asked like if you were asked to like become an attending at your program after fellowship, what would you say? Because I feel like that's kind of like a sneaky way of like really getting how they feel about it. Because I feel like if any way they say no, then it's not a red flag, but like I feel like anybody who really loves their program would really wanna come back there for being attending, unless they obviously want to do private practice. But and then another one actually, I don't know if it came up when I was in Dr. Allen's room at Mount Sinai or a different room, but we got like talking about my away rotations. And they asked me where like I would go out of my aways. I think that was a good way of them gauging what type of program I liked. So I think if you get to talking about aways with other like residents, you could ask them what program are you most like out of my aways, because then you can gauge really what that program's like. So like Emory, like it's blue collar, we work hard, but there's also some research opportunities, and I kind of feel like that's how Mount Sinai was. So that's like how I gauge like, oh, I probably would like Mount Sinai too, because I really like my way at Emory. So just like because you got to find weird ways to like figure out how you like these programs online. So just kind of get creative.
for Dr. Allen, what types of questions would you recommend that interviewing students ask attendings and faculties? So that's kind of similar to our previous question, actually, but just to get your perspective as well.
I think remember that we're not only interviewing you, but you're interviewing us. And you want to find a good fit. I think some things you want to make sure that you have in a program is maybe trying to find I would probably try to, I mean, as maybe you have to do it secretly, try to find like the weak link in the program, because your job as a resident is to become a good general orthopedic resident, and you will most likely do a fellowship. So you want to be well trained in all facets. Like you want to have the full gamut of orthopedic surgery before you do whatever it is you choose to go into. And also at the same time, make sure, like, you know, maybe take me through what happens if you're going to a program, whatever program it is, and there's like the chair of that program. Does, you know, let's say there are 8 residents there, and do only 4 get to rotate with Dr. So-and-so, and then the other 4. So make sure that it's relatively equitable, and has all those opportunities and you'll get better at it as you go on, I think, because you'll like realize the things that you actually want in a program, which you might not even realize when you're sitting here, and you'll realize it when you jive with a program, and then you might even change along the way. You probably got some sense at your aways. I remember doing my aways and thinking I wanted X, and then I ended up wanting Y. So you'll kind of change your own questions as you feel like the fit is changing, but you want a well-rounded program. So somehow trying to find out like what makes a well-rounded program. Am I going to get all of the training here I need in the next 5 years? Is the environment okay, and getting that vibe, and is it relatively equitable, or do people have different experiences?
Transitioning to our next question, this is going to be for Ellen and then Tucker. A lot of these events and interviews are kind of day long, and they have a pre and post interview social event, or maybe they don't. So I think it varies by program. Wondering any advice you have for that, and kind of like as a follow-up, if students are unable to attend these events due to conflict, is that going to reflect poorly on them? What are your thoughts on that, Ellen?
I think in general, the socials, I mean, all my socials were over Zoom. So they were all like varying degrees of awkward to awkward, because it's over Zoom and it's really hard to get a good feel for programs. But I do think that you know, I didn't really get to like the people that were part of the social from the program didn't really get to know me during those socials necessarily. But I feel like I still got a pretty decent idea of kind of what the culture of their program was. I mean, you could definitely tell the programs where like all the residents were crammed into one person's apartment, all hanging out, and like genuinely seemed like they hung out with each other outside of work, and like actually like all kind of were joking around and pretty familiar with each other, versus programs where everyone seemed a little bit more formal and a little bit less not collegial, but just like a little bit less kind of close to each other. So I knew that I was looking for a program that was a little bit closer and tighter knit, I think. So I at least kind of trusted my gut on that one with the socials. I think for socials that are in person, it's long days. Like expect to be tired, and you're going to be like in business attire, maybe wearing heels for like a full day, maybe being carted around on a tour, and then also have an interview, and then also having to go out and like be social. So like, you know, pace yourself, I think is probably good advice. Like make sure you stay hydrated. If there is some sort of open bar, you know, drink, enjoy yourself, but probably don't drink too much. That's probably not a great look during an interview, because all the stuff that you say to people will still be like stuff that people will talk about afterwards, even if it's not specifically to people on the admissions committee. But I think in general, like try to just relax and be yourself during the actual social events, and use it as an opportunity to see how the residents are all, and the residents in the program are all interacting with each other. Like I know my program, everyone has terrible sense of humor. We all are probably way too close with each other. But like if that's, you know, your kind of jam, then you'll pick up on that, and maybe that'll be something you're like, oh wow, that seems really cool. Or a program where people are really interested in talking about academic stuff or research or whatever, you know, maybe that's more your jam. But use it as an opportunity to really fill out the program, because I think in the interview itself, you know, there's so much nerves involved and so much preparation, and you're just trying not to be awkward, that, you know, by the time everyone kind of lets their guard down a little bit, you actually get a better feel for what the program is about and seeing if it might be a good fit for you.
Yeah, unfortunately, all my social experiences were at my kitchen table over Zoom. So it was definitely awkward. You definitely don't get like a true understanding or feel of the what residency, what that program specifically is like outside of residency. You know, like Ellen alluded to, I mean, there were some socials where most of the program was like together in one room and having pizza and drinks and stuff, and they were cracking jokes, and I kind of got the thought of like, okay, this is a really cool program. I feel like I meshed well with these personalities. And then I had some where no one was engaging, or maybe only a few residents showed up, and to me, how I interpreted that was almost just like a lack of interest. Or, I mean, I know they're busy and stuff, but um, with this year, I don't know what programs are doing, whether socials are over Zoom or in person, but just, always keep in the back of your mind, unfortunately, you're kind of being watched under a microscope. So if there is an open bar, be responsible, watch what you say. Everything that you do say is, unfortunately kind of fair game. And you don't want to show a different side of yourself.
And Evan, so after interviews at a program, what is the appropriate post-interview etiquette? So should you contact the program right after, and how should you really go about that?
I have an answer for that relative to our program. We actually say at the end of the interview, please do not send us a thank you note. We give people a bye. We know that it's like a big process, and you've met a bunch of people, and then you're going to a next one. And so we say, don't give us a thank you note. So if anything, I feel like the people who send a thank you note, they're like, oh man, you didn't listen. So it's almost like a red flag when they don't follow directions. But we've already had we just laugh at them, honestly, because we said not to. But I don't think you need to, quite frankly. I don't know if anyone else, Evan, do you think differently? I feel like, so I know how we do it. We make up our mind when you leave. Like, we are done. We are done with our rank list. So it kind of doesn't matter what you do. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely defer to what you have to say, just because I'm a PGY1 and I haven't been like on the other side of the interview trail. But some other programs,
Or Tucker.
just be careful. Like, some programs, I don't know if they're trying to play games, but they'll be like, we'd love to hear if we're your number one, after. And that's kind of hard, because you're like, you really like a program, but you have a different number one. And you're not going to sit there and lie to them that you're their number one, but you also don't want to ruin your chance because you don't send them a number one email. I think I got into that predicament with a couple places. And from my mentors, they kind of told me, like, this is in your hands. Like, this, you only get one shot at interviewing. So they didn't tell me to lie, but they told me if that happened, you send an email saying, I'm very strongly interested in your program and you will be one of my top candidates. Like, if you're at Mount Sinai, don't send a thank you interview because they told you not to. But I think it's just different for each program. So just be listening and take notes on what to do.
Next question is directed to Ellen and Tucker. And we kind of touched on this a little bit when discussing questions to ask residents and attendings. But the interview is kind of one of the only chances, a lot of times, if you don't do an away rotation, to get a feel of a program. I was wondering, now being on the other side of it, what are some questions that you would ask that you didn't think to ask, maybe as a med student, or things that ended up going into your rank list that would be really valuable to flush out during an interview? To Ellen, or if anyone else wants to jump in.
No, I have a good so I knew what I wanted out of residency was a program where I got along with my co-residents. I think for me that was almost equally important to getting good training, because it was going to be a long, hard 5 years. And now looking back, like, it's not a long 5 years. It's a hard 5 years, but it's not long. It flies. But I wanted to know that I was going to be supported by my co-residents and also have people that I was going to be hanging out with more than my family or anyone else, that I was going to enjoy spending some time with, at least on some level, or at least know that they were going to be doing their jobs and I was going to be doing my job and I could rely on them. I wanted a program where I was going to get really good clinical training, which is hard to flesh out in an interview. You ask people like, what's your operative experience like? And everyone says that it's amazing. And then if you ask people like, what do you actually do in the operating room? Sometimes you get a little bit of a more nuanced answer, and maybe a little bit more detail, or asking like, what is the role of mid-levels at your program? Like, do you have mid-level support to like help with discharges and to help with some of the floor stuff that just like piles up and turns into this endless stream of stuff that is clinically necessary for patients but not as educational? Or do you have to ever compete with mid-levels for like first assist or second assist in cases, which would be unfortunate, at least in my perspective. And then I knew that I wanted to do research and I wanted to have the opportunity to do my own research. So, asking people, what is your research mentorship like? Where do residents have funding to go to conferences? Are they allowed time off to go to conferences? Do they have to find coverage for themselves? Are residents paired with mentors and essentially, told this is your project, this is what you're going to do? Or can you come up with an idea yourself as a resident and then come to an attending with it and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this project. Can you sponsor it? Or are you interested in mentoring me through it? For life stuff, I knew I wanted some more green space because I have a dog. Oh, Dr. Allen, your dog's really cute. So I asked residents about like dog parks. I think probably one of my favorite interviews was a group of like female residents, and I asked them if they have like doggy daycares that they send their dogs to, and like they were talking all about this daycare that their dogs were picked up on a bus from their house somehow and carted around in this bus. So it was like this incredible experience. I was like, wow, I'm going to rank them a little bit higher, I think, just because they have this daycare bus available, whatever. So, kind of getting a feel for the area, and it's, not just necessarily like, what breweries do you go to or whatever, like, what do you do when you have a day off? Like, is there like space and time available? Like, are there gyms around that you like, or is there like places to go climbing or running, or is it safe to be outside? I don't know. For me, that was something that I was interested in knowing. So, but I think in general, like it comes down to almost, so I had all these questions in this list of questions I asked people, and then I did take notes during my interviews and tried to remember like which people I talked to about what, to get to just have something to look at the end of the interview season and kind of objectively look at everything. But I also wrote down like a gut punch at the very end of the interview, which is like, do I want to go here? Do I not want to go here? Why? And like a 2 sentences about like, I really like this program or I really didn't like this program. And ultimately, when I went back and kind of ranked programs, that was what I looked at, which was just like, when I left the interview, gut punch instinct, do I want to go to this program or not? And that was what I built my rank list off of. And it sometimes varied even based on like the notes that I took. Like I got really good information about programs on paper. They looked great, but my gut punch instinct was like kind of meh, or like, I liked this program better for some intangible reason. So if you are going to kind of write down stuff at the end of the day of all the information that you're gathering, I would highly recommend doing something like that.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing. And I don't know if it's answering the original question or not, but when it came down time to like, rank your programs, I mean, depending on how many interviews you do, it's a whirlwind. You kind of black out, you forget what you said, you forget things that were said about the program. So I immediately made like a pros and cons and highlights of each program so that I remember, because the interview season when I did it during Zoom was 2.5 months long. So there were some programs I interviewed in December and it was like mid-February. I was like, oh man, I kind of forgot what we talked about. So make sure you have like a thorough kind of pros and cons of each program so you can rank appropriately and you're not forgetting anything. And then really emphasize being on the other side of it now, like really come prepared with questions about life outside of residency. We understand, it is a 5-year program. You're moving your entire life to a possibly new city, different location. We understand residency is very stressful. We want you guys to have, your outlets and feel at home in this new environment. So come prepared with these questions, about the area, are there dog parks? Like certain things like that, which you may initially think, okay, that might be a little annoying to ask and not pertinent, but it is very pertinent. And it's, very important for us, so we can have a life outside of residency and have a way to kind of balance and de-stress from the workload and the stress.
Our next question is actually one from the chat. So one of the audience members said, I've heard some places have a skills portion of the interview day. I was curious about what this could potentially involve and to hear about the panelists' experience with that, either from the attending perspective or the resident perspective, if you've ever been through such a thing.
I think very briefly, I know we have one, often at least. I disagree with it. I wish we didn't have it. I don't think we should have it. But again, I want to reiterate that we are kind of just looking for outliers. Almost no one can do it. Like, so we're just looking for someone who completely spazzes out, to be honest, and can't like function at all when they're doing it. We do not care if you can do it. I don't like it though. I disagree with it, but we have one.
My interviews were all over Zoom, so we didn't have like a formal skill session, but there was one interview where they asked me to teach them something, which I think kind of translates almost as a skill set, like a Zoom version of a skill session, because ultimately at some point in time you're going to be PGY2 and all of a sudden you have an intern who's listening to you, which is terrifying. But so kind of in that sense, you know, and I taught them how to run a marathon, which is not glamorous and not relevant to orthopedics at all, but it's something that I'm familiar with. So I was like, okay. And we had a nice conversation about it. But yeah, I think like maybe just your ability to like kind of calmly think through a problem is more important than actually what you're teaching or what you're doing.
I think have any like skill specific things over Zoom when I interviewed some programs. There was one where I had to teach two attendings how about a topic in under 2 minutes, and the topic had to be something that they knew nothing about, which was very difficult because I was having technical difficulties leading up to that, so I was very frazzled. And then the only other thing I could think of is I had like 30 seconds to find something in my house that like best emulates who I am. So having to think like that quickly and run around my house sporadically, you know, frantically trying to find something was a little stressful.
So our final question to all the panelists, if you had to maybe distill it down to one last piece of advice you would give the applicants this cycle, your one-liner, or you can ramble a little bit. No, don't need to shorten it down. What would that piece of advice be? And we can start with Dr. Allen.
I mean, I think I'm just going to keep reading. So like, we want you, and just relax a little bit and be yourself and get as much information as you can from it, because this is not the most PC thing to say. Just don't be weird. Just be normal, be yourself, and get as much as you can about the program and be honest and genuine. If you know, it'll just happen naturally, and this is going to be very cliche, but I mean, I feel like I started the whole process myself, and I kind of changed along the way. I ended up matching at a program, matched at Emory, and I didn't even rotate there. And when I got there, I knew that was the program for me. Like I just knew it. It wasn't even on my radar. So be open and just be genuine and honest, and listen to yourself and listen to those feedback things. We want you. So just relax.
We'll go to Ellen next.
Yeah, maybe completely unrelated to interviews, but fourth year, like this point in time, fourth year is kind of the first time and maybe one of the last times you actually have a chance to like sit down because you just like finish all your sub-Is. You like, if you're anything like me, I turned into a vegetable on my couch for like 3 weeks after I finished my sub-Is because I was just exhausted and needed to like decompress and like hang out with, you know, my people. But you also like just finished medical school, which is crazy. Like it's like even beyond the orthopedic, like you're going to be a doctor in a couple months, which is awesome. And I can say there was a question in the chat a little bit earlier for people that didn't see it. I was like, you know, it's so competitive and, you know, is it worth it? Essentially, like you're going to start intern year and it is the coolest thing you could ever possibly imagine. And that's just being an intern. Like being a PGY2 automatically is like so much better. It's amazing. But even just being an intern, like holding a pager, it's the most stressful and like worst 10 minutes of your life and the best 10 minutes of your life all within like 30 seconds of each other. And then you stay in the hospital all day and you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do it all over again every single day. And it is like this incredible whirlwind of meeting people and working with patients and applying all this knowledge that you work so hard for. So if you have a chance to in the next few months, like sit down, celebrate the fact that you just finished medical school and just did all the things that you did, because you're already sitting here in this application cycle, like thinking about applying, like you've applied to orthopedic surgery, which is one of the most competitive subspecialties, and you're that competitive. Like you're sitting here in this room doing this thing. So regardless of whatever else happens, like take a minute to like breathe and to think about all the stuff that you did and reflect, because you're going to do even crazier stuff in the next, 5 years, but you don't always have the time to actually like sit down and celebrate or reflect on it. So give yourself a little bit of space if you have the time to.
Excellent. Then we can go to Evan next.
I would say just know yourself and pitch who you are to the program. Don't like make yourself seem any different because you think it's cooler if you do these things versus these things. Just like you are who you are, and that's who you want to portray yourself as. And just like Dr. Allen said, like I kind of like did in a way at Emory as a last ditch thing because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and my mentor was like, "Here, I can get you on here," and that ended up being a place that I really liked. So you never know where you're gonna end up, and Emory's pretty cool. So come check us out. Shameless plug.
And then Tucker, do you want to close this out?
Yeah. Keep it simple. I mean, just be yourself. I mean, as cliche as that sounds, that's what everyone else is saying. I mean, be yourself. You're gonna have a much more difficult time trying to put on this facade of someone that you're not than just being your genuine self. And like Ellen was saying, like take a step back, enjoy the moment, which is also very cliche, but I know it's a very stressful time. You know, you guys are worrying about the future, but I mean, you guys worked 4 years to get to where you are now, and a lot of hard work that doesn't go unnoticed. Take a step back, pat yourself on the back, and be excited. It's a soon to be new chapter in y'all's lives. It's an exciting, moment, and that interview season is gonna, fly by quicker than you know it, and it's gonna be match day. So just know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and try not to be as stressed out. I know it's hard to do, but just be excited about this, upcoming, chapter of interviews here in the next few months.